Hi and welcome back to my channel. For this video, I was very much inspired by Taylor Swift's new set list for the Tortured Poets department, which she later on named Female Rage the Musical. I realized now that one of my favorite genres in media is female rage. So I have composed a list of book recommendations that perfectly fit in the category female rage, unhinged women, supporting women's wrongs. Like, if you love that genre, this is the video for you. I have two categories for you. Category one is about the girlies that are completely succumbing to all of the societal pressures that are being put on them, and they've just, tapped out. They're going basically insane. Category two is the same thing, like they're also succumbing to all of the pressures, but they also like to kill some men. So before getting into it though, I want to give a huge disclaimer. Obviously, I'm very much aware that the women in these books have very real mental health issues. I'm not trying to diminish that by any means, but I'm just using humor to kind of see the light in the darkness. Secondly, I very much would recommend checking out the trigger warnings for all of the books that I'm going to mention. They're obviously dealing with very tough situations and mental health issues, so if that is something that you do not want to read, maybe this video or maybe the books in this video are not for you. So without any further ado, let's get into some female rage. How to Kill Men and Get Away with It by Katie Brent is essentially what the title says it is. I would describe this book as female Dexter, but in this case, Dexter goes out and punishes all of the men that have wronged women in any sort of way. We follow our main character, Kitty Collins, who's this beautiful, successful, highly desirable woman who, after a night of clubbing, gets obviously followed by this weird ass dude because women can apparently not walk around on the streets anymore at night. And she accidentally kills this guy and is like, this was quite fun. Let me make this my hobby. She basically takes up serial killing as a hobby and goes after all of the men that have wronged women in any sort of way. Like, she will go on social media, she will follow the news, and basically punish these men by murdering them. I love this book in particular because it's quite like dark and twisted, but also pretty funny because Kitty very much reminds me of a female version of Joe Goldberg from the TV show You, because you can hear her inner monologue, like her inner thoughts about how she's gonna kill these guys, how she's gonna cover up the body, like, what am I supposed to do with this corpse? Like, it is quite funny. Obviously, like, not anything to aspire to be, but it is quite hilarious. Highly recommend picking this up, and maybe you'll find some tips and tricks in this one. Next up, we have My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ossessa Moshfegh. This is a book that went very viral on TikTok last year, but in my opinion, it is very much worth the hype. We follow our unnamed main character who, at first glance, doesn't really seem to have anything to be unhappy about. She's conventionally attractive, she's desirable, she has a successful job at an art gallery. Maybe it's because of the loss of her parents, maybe it's because of her toxic relationship with her boyfriend, or her almost sadomasochistic friendship with her best friend. But she's like, I'm in the mood to sleep for a year. And I think everyone has had that particular feeling where they're just kind of done with life for a day and they're just wanting to sleep and wake up the next day and hope that their worries are gone. The main character in this book has the same idea, but instead of doing it for a day, she's like, I'm gonna do it for a year. What ends up happening is that she tells her psychiatrist that she suffers from insomnia, which she does not suffer from insomnia. She can sleep quite well. They're not the best doctor, and they prescribe all of these very experimental drugs that end up having her in this comatose state for a year. Some of these drugs have very weird side effects, and she even starts like sleepwalking and doing stuff in her sleep that she has no recollection of doing. This is not the most uplifting book to read, like, it's quite tough. She's very depressed, but on the other hand, it's also sometimes quite funny because she has a very sarcastic outlook on life. Some of the situations she ends up getting into because she remembers half of the things that she's doing are quite hilarious. This book is also set in the early 2000s in New York, and the attack on the World Trade Center plays a big part of the book as well. I also read this book from my book club, and we all unanimously were completely obsessed with this one. Very interesting, and would highly recommend this one if you are a fan of unhinged women. Next up, we have Bunny by Mona Awad. This book I would describe as Mean Girls meets Alice in Wonderland on psychedelics. This is a book that very much talks about the idea of cultish academics and girls versus girls, like the nasty, mean, judgmental vibes that certain cliquey girl groups can have. We follow our main character, Samantha.
Anna, Elsa, Sven, Samantha? I don't even know it's Samantha.
I've been wanting to make this joke for so long. Who's essentially like the Katie of this book. Like, she's not like the other girls. She does not care about appearances. She just wants to become a successful writer. But at her writing course at university, there's this very cliquey, very weird group of girls called the Bunnies, or the plastics of this book. They're very coquettish, sickly sweet, almost kind of cultish because they move as one entity, they almost talk as one entity. And slowly but surely, Samantha becomes quite obsessed with this group of girls and she tries to befriend them. Basically, this is the plot of Mean Girls.
Why are you so obsessed with me?
She starts to befriend them, to get to know them, because she just thinks that they are very weird. And oh boy, things become very weird very quick. Basically, once Samantha becomes part of the Bunnies, the psychedelic Alice in Wonderland part of the book starts to take the upper hand. You kind of don't really know what is going on anymore. Like, you're not quite sure if what is happening is actually really happening. Like, is Samantha suffering from some sort of episode that makes her see things that aren't there? Like,
Samantha?
this book is very much for the girlies that just like really weird stuff. I personally really enjoyed it, and I also thought it was a very interesting satire that critiques the cultish environment of academia, but also the toxicity that is sometimes very inherent in female friendships. So that is Bunny. Next up, I wanted to talk about A Dowry of Blood by S.D. Gibson. This is a book that is essentially about Dracula, but told from the perspective of one of his wives called Constanza. She basically chronicles how she met Dracula, how he ended up turning her into a vampire, and how her life with him is/was. You basically get to learn that Dracula is, surprise, surprise, a very toxic man. He is very possessive, he's deceitful, he's manipulative, he's like gaslighter 101, like he is very, very toxic. You also learn that Constanta has no freedom, like despite being a vampire and living for forever, essentially, she's not allowed to do anything that Dracula does not allow her to. Naturally, Dracula starts to take on many more brides. Constanza, along with the other brides, decide to conspire against him and find a way to permanently end his life. This is not a spoiler, by the way. Like, Constanza explains, I think at the start of the book, like, hey, I was his demise, and I'm gonna tell you what led me to killing him in the first place. This is very much a book that explores the idea of coming to terms that what you thought was love was not love at all, but just a very toxic form of manipulation. It is very gruesome, very explicit. We are dealing with vampires, but very much recommend this one. Very unhinged. We love some unhinged women in this household. I had to switch microphones because my tiny mic ran out of battery, and this is my second time recording this one. I'm not doing it again, so sorry for the audio switch. But lastly, I wanted to talk about The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is probably one of the OG unhinged women books. This book is set in the 1950s, and we follow our 19-year-old main character called Esther Greenwood, who is a very bright college student who received a scholarship to work as an intern, like a summer-long intern at a New York magazine, because she aspires to become a writer. Despite the opportunity, Esther becomes increasingly detached and depressed because she realizes that the fast-paced city life is just not something that she enjoys, and she also feels very much trapped by the societal pressures that are being thrust upon her, specifically as a woman in the 1950s. As her mental health deteriorates, she becomes increasingly depressed to the point that she tries to commit suicide, I think multiple times throughout the book, gets admitted into a psychological facility center and receives multiple forms of therapy, including electroshock therapy, which was sadly something that was still very current in the 1950s. This is a very bleak representation of what it is like to be a woman in that time period. It is also rumored that this book is sort of autobiographical because Sylvia Plath herself dealt with a lot of mental health issues too. Every single time I try to film, there's an ice cream truck, I swear to God. I must admit this is a very bleak and depressing book, so if you're personally dealing with mental health issues, I would not recommend reading this book. I, at the time of reading this, was doing okay mentally, but it still took quite a toll on me, so read this at your own caution. But I had to include this one because it is like the prime example of a book within the genre. If you have any other book recommendations that fit this genre, I would love to hear them. I personally have many more, but I just could not include all of them in this video because it would have ended up being way too long. But if you're interested in any more, do let me know and I'll make a part 2. And thank you very much for watching. Have a good day.